You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we jump into disaster recovery testing. And trust me, you don't want to learn these lessons the hard way. I've got some wild stories about DR tests gone wrong, including one from my early days at a bank that'll make you cringe. My co-host Prasanna and I break down exactly how to approach DR testing the right way, starting with the basics and working your way up. We'll tell you why non-destructive testing is absolutely critical. Seriously, you don't want to blow up your production environment just to test DR. And how to set realistic success criteria that won't make you cry. Another episode from Lessons from the Trenches. I hope you like it. By the way, if you don't know who I am, your first-time listener, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that we had no backups of the production database that we had just lost. I don't want that to happen to you. That's why I do this podcast. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. Hi, I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup. And if you could take just a quick moment to subscribe or follow so that you'll get our great content, that would be great. I am sitting here with none other than the guy who's very concerned about my obsession with serial killers lately, or at least one serial killer. How's it going, Prasanna?
I'm good, Curtis. Yeah.
Worried about me?
So I think after this, you should watch Hannibal. The TV show, not the movie. They both are good, but yes.
Right. Yeah.
And then we can discuss about whether people taste differently depending on what they eat.
That's always something you talk about.
Yes, but your latest obsession is Dexter.
Yeah. Which for the record, I'm re-watching, right? I enjoyed Dexter when it was on and when I had to wait a week.
Could you imagine going back to those old days?
Oh Lord! I'm kind of. I think aren't you like? Don't you watch? You do not watch shows when they're on. You wait until they're done and then you binge them.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. For the most part. Although these days I don't actually have like broadcast TV. So
right.
It's whatever is available on Netflix or Amazon or take your pick.
We actually have YouTube TV, so we have broadcasts, and there's some shows that we watch on there. But their shows were like, this episode, that episode, they're all the same, so it's not like Dexter where there's an ongoing thing.
Here's the funny thing, right? So it started off first on TV, right? And like you said, you had to wait a week.
Showtime. Yeah.
And then what I used to do, right? So I didn't have Showtime. And so I had to wait for it to come out on Netflix DVDs. Oh, and then I would request the DVDs. And of course I was cheap, frugal, however you want to say it, right? And so I had like the 2 DVD plan. So I'd request like 2 DVDs, right? So you'd get like 6 episodes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
5 or 6 episodes. You'd binge watch those, and then you'd send them back, and then you'd have to wait a week to then get the next set of DVDs.
That's so funny.
In order to watch it. And that's, I think, how I ended up watching Dexter, and I think Breaking Bad might have been the same way too.
Yeah, you're cheaper than me. Dexter is currently on Netflix. So, yeah. Anyway, so and you can watch all these things while you do disaster recovery testing. Because there's a lot of time. There's a lot of time when you do DR testing. There's a lot of downtime, right? You sit there and you stare at the screen. I'm gonna start out a story. What's that?
But can you really?
What?
Like, I understand. Like, if you're watching Dexter or pick one of these the shows that pull you in, right? Would you actually be focused, or would your DR testing basically balloon like 10 times the normal amount of time because you're like, I forgot to get back to that?
Well, you know what? It's going to depend on the type of DR test you do, because some DR tests, there's a lot of waiting. There's a lot of, I'm going to start the restore part, and then I sit there for many, many hours. And if you got one of those, then it doesn't really matter whether you're focused or not, as long as somebody's keeping an eye on the percentage done. And I'm going to start this with a story from back in the day. The first backup, the first restore test I ever did. The first, at least the first one I can really remember. And this was when we had, I was at the bank, and MBNA, which at the time was the second largest credit card corporation, and I was in charge of backups. And I had talked the boss into moving to what would become the first of many commercial backup products that I had used. And that product was a product called SMArc, which, as I've mentioned before, should have been called SMBack, because it was not an archive product; it was a backup product. They were out of Minnesota area, and we had converted to them. But I, like a good little backup guy, I had done like a parallel implementation, and so I was still running my old dump tapes, and I was running this new fancy tool. And one of the things that this tool had was built-in compression. I wasn't using the compression on the tape drives. I was using compression in the software.
Yep.
To compress to go to the tape drives. So we had our first major failure. File server HP FS01. I still remember the name of the server.
Something's just like get burned into your brain. You'll never forget them.
And this is related to another story to a friend of mine that I've referred to before, where she was a consultant and she accidentally this was a self-inflicted disaster where a consultant was trying to clean up home directories, and she just did a really, really good job of cleaning up all the home directories. So I put my SMArc tapes in my front pocket, and I put my backup tapes in my back pocket. And I went down there like Mighty Mouse. Here I come to save the day. And some of you will get that.
Not available on iTunes, I don't think.
Not available on iTunes. And we went in there, and I put, these were DDS tapes, right? And because we were all HP. HP loved DDS. And so I popped in a DDS tape. I pulled up my SMArc software, and I started the restore test. And it wasn't a restore test. It was. Yeah. I was testing in anger. We were testing like this was for real, and I had not done any actual testing, and so I kicked off the restore, and I'm watching, and I like a good little Unix boy, I had a while loop running, and it was doing a DF on the to display the size of the file system. And I'm watching, and like a long time was going by, and there was no change in the size of the file system. And I was like, this is weird. And then I went over and I looked. I just out of curiosity, I looked at the tape drive. Right? It's kind of like your car dies. You open up the hood, like I have any idea what's going on inside there. Look in there, and I see the light on the tape drive, and it goes blink, blink.
1, 1000, 2, 1003, 1004, 1000.
Blink, blink. Right? And there were these giant pauses in between the blinks. And so I'm like, that's strange. It always blinks when it's reading or writing data, right? So I called up the guys, and I said, hey.
The vendor.
Yeah, vendor. Yeah, called it the vendor. What's going on here? They said, well, by any chance, did you use the compression feature? And I said, yes, I did. They go, yeah, so let us explain to you how the compression feature works. So when we're backing up files, basically we do the equivalent of compress minus C, I think it was, to send the result to standard out, and it sends it straight to the tape. But we don't know how to do that on the way back in. And so what we do is we read the tape, we read the entire file that we're going to restore into, and we restore it to temp. And then we run uncompress in place in temp. And then we move the uncompressed restored file to where it's going to go. And we do that one file at a time because we're concerned that we're going to fill up temp. And I'm like, oh, So like if I have a single file that's bigger than temp, it's just not going to work. They're like, yeah. And they're like, if this is a concern, we suggest perhaps you don't use this feature.
It would have been helpful to know before I needed this.
Right. And so thank God I had the backup tapes in my backup pocket, and I pulled them out. I was like, okay, we're just using, dump here. And we restored it. Everything was basic, right? And luckily I had backups from the previous night. And really the moral of this story is don't do that. Right? Test your backups before you need them, right? Do a DR test, and that's what we're talking about today. Do a DR test before you actually need to do DR. And this may, we'll see. Sometimes when we have these episodes, Prasanna, we have these conversations beforehand, and I'm like, I don't know if we can fill up an entire episode over this topic. We said that, I think, over the last one.
Yeah.
And it ended up not being a problem at all.
Yeah.
This is not one of those episodes. This is one of those episodes where I think we might go long, and we'll end up turning this into 2 episodes. Because there's a lot to talk about here. Because before we do any testing, right? What do you think we need to do?
Well, you need to understand.
There's probably no wrong answer here.
I think before you could do
unless your answer is nothing.
No. So I was going through my head. I was thinking, even before you get to testing, you need to understand what are the business requirements for how quickly you need to bring up that site. Which actually you don't necessarily think about as testing, but that's actually part of your backup system design before you even get to the testing part.
Yeah. So we have to agree on what success would be, right? And we have to agree on obviously what we're going to test, but we have to agree on the parameters of that test. And so, what do you think are going? What? Go ahead.
And I was just going to ask about like your parameters, right? What are those parameters? In my mind, some of those are how quickly do I need to be able to bring up what the scope is, right? Am I failing over and trying to recover a file, an application, a data center? Right? What am I looking to actually test? So it depends what you're trying to test and what the extent is that you want to test. And also, I think the other thing is how close do you want to get to testing an actual disaster as part of that?
Right. And I would say that there are different kinds of DR tests. And there's... And if you haven't done any, I would say let's start small, right? If we've never done a DR test of any kind, I would probably start with. What are you laughing at?
I was thinking about the test you don't want to try is who was the guy in Alaska?
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, we definitely have to put a link to that episode. That was the most amazing episode ever. In fact, you know what? We'll probably replay it over the holiday break. By the way, we love him, and it had a happy ending. But oh my God, what a nightmare!
I think he was rebuilding a RAID array, if I recall. He was swapping the disks around.
It was self-inflicted in that he said, "I want to move the disks around
because they were like different sizes." I thought,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. Like, and he's like, the only way I can do this is to just wipe everything and start over. And he's like, yeah, okay, so that's what I'll do. I'll just wipe everything, and then I'll restore everything. My backup system works, and this is how he tested his backup system. Please, dude, he definitely learned some things along the way, but yeah. So don't do that.
Don't do that. Yeah.
Don't do that. But learn from his example. Listen to that episode and have a heart attack as you're listening.
Because the thing that ran through my head was someone who's never done DR testing would have been like, yeah, I'm just going to shoot in the head my production site with all the applications and I make sure that or just test it out and see does it fail over properly.
Yes, the key here is non-destructive DR testing, right? And so to go back to like setting the scope, if this is your first time doing DR testing, I would set the scope as small as possible. In fact, if you've never done DR testing, I would not even be doing DR testing. I would just be doing restore testing. And
what's the difference, Curtis?
What's that?
What's the difference?
The question is, are we going to declare a disaster and say that this site is down in some way, and then we're going to fail over to another site? Or are we simply just going to bring another server online, right?
Yeah.
Depending on how you define depending on the day of the week and the day of the year and which year it is, I have called every time you have to restore a server of any kind a disaster. It's just a disaster at different levels, right? So if a server caught on fire, that's a disaster, right? And or if a server just died, right? Or if like the story in the beginning, I think that was a disaster because it took out a production workload.
Yeah.
Right. So I would say perhaps start with a single production workload and restore it. First off, just restore it, like in place, not in place, not in place. I meant like within the data center or within whatever computing environment you're using. And then start talking about VPNs and, that sort of stuff. So that would be defining the scope as small as you can for the first test that you can.
So
and
maybe
go ahead.
Like maybe it might be a directory within a file server.
If you've never done any restore testing, yes, a simple directory within a file server. Does our backup system work at all, right? And then the next is going to be some type of recovery of an entire server, right? Hopefully you have that server virtualized because doing that is going to be obviously much easier, assuming you're treating that VM as a VM. If it's not virtualized, then we're going to start going down the level of bare metal recovery, right? Yeah. BMR. By the way, we should probably do an episode on that. I didn't think about that. We should do an episode on that.
I know you keep mentioning server as you're talking about this.
Yeah.
Would you also qualify that could be server or an application?
Thanks for bringing that up.
That's why you keep me around,
So it depends on what you mean by application, right? You could... These are like the different levels.
Yeah.
You talk about restoring a directory. I would also look at restoring a single database within a server, right? If that's what you mean by application, then I would say yes. Sometimes when we say application, actually a lot of times when we say application, what we mean is application.
Multiple things.
On multiple servers and multiple things all interconnect. And if that's what you're talking about, I'm going to say no.
No. Yeah,
At least
I was thinking like
a first time out.
Yeah, I was thinking more like restore your MySQL database.
Exactly, right?
Or a table within your MySQL database, right?
Yeah. And again, non-destructively.
Yeah.
Right? Just an entity. And you can try all of these things, right? You can try restoring a database. You can try restoring all of the databases on a server. You can try restoring a server with the databases. Or any other applications that might, like a web server. You can try all of these things individually and make sure that you've got those pieces down. Yeah. That this is about defining the scope. Try all of the different pieces first and make sure you've got the recovery path for each of those parts of your infrastructure down before you decide, okay, we're going to pretend we're going to blow up the data center.
Yeah. And the other reason to bring that up, it's important to test these different types of components because there are going to be different nuances. Like how you deal with databases and recovering that is definitely going to be different than file servers, which is probably also going to be different than servers. And so it's important to understand the nuances of what is possible and the steps for each one of these.
And also the different backup systems. So if you've got physical, you've got physical servers that are not virtualized. You've got servers running in Hyper-V or VMware or, any sort of
Broadcom.
on-premises virtualization. What was the third one?
Broadcom. You said VMware.
It will always be VMware to me. It will always be VMworld. If you've got VMs running in AWS, GCP, Azure, if you've got basically all of the different places that you have infrastructure, probably have different backup and recovery methodologies for each of them. And so you should also be looking at testing all of those. And you should be looking at testing each of them individually as an overall process that you're working towards developing, declaring a much bigger disaster.
Yeah. And I think it's important also to be familiar, because sometimes you might have a real disaster that doesn't require you to recover every single component within that higher level application. Right? So being familiar with the individual components is also important depending on what the disaster is.
Yeah, agreed. And, there's an application that we haven't talked about in terms of including or not including it in your DR scope, and that is, what about SaaS applications like Microsoft 365? There are a couple of different scenarios there. One is your account is damaged in some sort of logical way, meaning logical corruption, meaning a ransomware attack. You deleted it, right? We've covered that on
the provider damaged it.
Yeah, the provider. Well, that was. I'm going to list that as like a third.
Okay.
Well, if they damaged your account,
Yes. Yeah.
and there is an example of that. For example, the Salesforce.
Yep, that's what I was thinking.
Salesforce story, where they went and blew up everybody's permissions, and everybody had to restore that themselves. Man, I hate that story. I really do, because Salesforce, in my opinion, did not own up to. They didn't step up to the plate. At the time, I remember writing a blog post for Druva. I was working for Druva at the time, and I remember writing for a blog post that said something like proof that Salesforce should not be trusted with your backup infrastructure, because they clearly don't know what they're doing. So there's your account being damaged in some way, and then there's OVH Cloud and what happened there, where the entire infrastructure goes poof. Right? So I think you should have that as you should come up with that as a scenario that you need to test. It's going to be challenging in most cases, because let's just talk about the different scenarios. Let's say it's AWS. The way most people back up AWS, if AWS goes down and takes your backups with it,
You're screwed.
You're screwed. The way that most people back up most cloud infrastructure. And then there's the fact that most people trust their SaaS provider for data protection, which they should not, right? I talk about that all the time, and they should not. But even if you're backing up your data to a third party, and it's not, they should not, right? I talk about that all the time, and they should not.
This has been an age-old problem, though.
This is
right?
an age-old problem, but we're talking about testing today.
Yeah.
So, by the way, this is definitely going to be 2 episodes. We haven't even gotten to the testing yet. All we're talking about is setting up the requirements. So this is definitely going to be a second episode. So we talk about setting the scope, and we talk about starting small first, each of these individual components in your infrastructure. And were you about to say something?
That this is not destructive and not disruptive. Both of those.
Nice.
Right?
I like that. Non-destructive, non-disruptive DR testing. I like it.
Because you don't want to take down your production. You don't want to affect, say, ongoing DR resiliency that's available on the secondary site because you're about to do some of this testing. There are cases where you do want to impact that, but when you're doing sort of these individual component levels, you may not want to impact your overall DR posture while you're doing this testing.
Yeah, that last one is probably the hardest, and it may actually be impossible. What are we talking about there? We're saying that if you have a DR system, I hope you have a DR system. If you have one, see if there's a way to test your DR without messing up your DR. I'm not sure if that's possible in many scenarios.
But one of the things I think about, right, is a lot of data protection vendors, they do test and dev, right? You can spin up a copy off of your storage that is a writable copy that you can then use for testing out your recovery systems.
Right.
Without impacting the actual recovery instance.
Right. Right.
And so that's what I'm thinking about, is just like those sort of scenarios. Or maybe you're able to wheel in an extra server or beg, borrow, steal an extra server to use for your recovery testing or DR testing.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I like this idea of wheeling in a server. I mean, I think many of our listeners, and every time by default, I'm always talking about data center, even though and then my brain goes, hey, nobody has a data center anymore. I don't think many people are wheeling in a server. I think that they're looking at cloud infrastructure as a way. I know that not everybody can do that, and that's obviously another thing that you have to decide up front is, how are we going to do this recovery? Are we going to do it in the cloud? Are we going to do it to alternate infrastructure? These are all things that you have to decide up front. We have to decide what it is we're going to restore. We have to decide where we're going to restore and how, right? And deciding the where, again, this is all about planning. This is all stuff that needs to be decided up front. This is also something that's going to be part of your backup and DR design. You will have decided up front, how we're going to do DR, disaster recovery, how we're going to do it. And that place is most likely the place that you're going to be doing DR testing. And, there are a lot of choices here. Cloud infrastructure, I think, is the best choice for most environments. Another choice is aging infrastructure, right? So you move your older stuff out, and that becomes your DR environment. Another very common choice is basically there's two ways to basically rent infrastructure for the purposes of disaster recovery. One way is to contract with a company that will provide what you need if and when you need it, and that costs let's say this much. And then there's a company that will provide everything you need, always available to you all the time, even when you don't need it, and that will cost this much. Yeah, exactly. I can't do the fingers. I got to do the hands, right? It's significantly more. And this is why I push everybody to the cloud as much as you can, because that's the beautiful thing about the cloud, is that you can just literally snap your fingers and you can also use infrastructure as code, so that you can just make all of the hardware that you need magically appear. What's that?
And work, right?
And work, yeah. Magically appear when you need it, and then the moment you no longer need it because your test is over, you can also snap your fingers and it all goes away, and you just pay for it only when it's up and running.
Yeah.
So the next thing to talk about is, so we decided what it is we're going to test. We decided where we're going to test it, how we're going to test it. What about our success criteria?
Yeah, I think this is important to note up front what it means to be successful. But I think it's also important to be realistic. right, with your success criteria, especially if this is sort of your first time doing this. Because I remember the story you tell, Curtis, about your run books that you would create when you used to work at the bank.
Yeah.
And how a lot of times they were not able to get through and actually do the recovery because a step would be skipped or something wouldn't work properly. And so I think it's sort of a learning process. So don't be too hard on yourself if the first 10, 20, 100 times you try doing your recovery testing, it's not like 100% successful.
Yeah,
because it may not be your fault. Things change, environments change, hardware may change, right? There's so many other factors. But
yeah, this is very closely related to the discussions we've had over doing cyber recovery testing, right? And your disaster recovery very likely will be part of an overall cyber recovery process. And I agree with you that it's interesting. Mentally, I was going somewhere completely different, but you once again, this is why we make such a good team. You were more like, hey, make the the requirements, be nice to yourself, especially if it's the first time out. Requirement number 1, no one dies, right?
Yeah.
No fires are created, no one quits, set your expectations low, and nobody can take them away from you. I'm borrowing heavily from Michael P. Connolly, the comedian, who says that's the happiness to life is to lower your expectations. And he's like, my goal for today is to go to the bathroom outside my pants. So yeah, set the the success criteria low in the beginning. Where I was going was, of course, RTO and RPO, which we talked about before. That is definitely going to determine the overall success. Once you click the stopwatch and you begin the recovery process, and then you click it that everything is back up and running, and you've tested that whatever it is that you destroyed or you pretended you destroyed is now up and running and fully functional again, as we've mentioned in the RTO and RPO. That doesn't just mean the time of the restore. It's here's
the question: is it RTO and RPO, or is it RTA and RPA?
Well, that is the objective, right? The RTO and RPO are the objective that we are shooting for, and so the goal in a recovery test of any kind is that the RTA, that's recovery time actual, and recovery point actual, are less than or equal to the RTO and RPO.
Go back and listen to our episode. We covered it, I think, a couple episodes ago, right?
No,
like 3?
3 or 4. I don't know. It depends on when this one gets published. We just did it.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We just did it. Oh, was that really the last episode?
Well, it just published.
Okay.
But again, I don't know. We'll see how these things. But if RTO and RPO don't just roll off your tongue and you don't know what they are, and all of that stuff, they literally should be in every conversation having anything to do with backup and DR design. But that, to me, is the ultimate success criteria, right? Another success criteria is the degree, and this is going to be a percentage, a percentage achieved, and that is the degree to which you were able to follow your run book and just do what's in the run book. This is what you were alluding to before, right?
Well, and hopefully you have a run book.
Yeah, like you said, that assumes you have a run book. Yeah. And the way we always did this at the bank, as we mentioned before, is that we would have someone other than the person who runs the backup system do the DR testing, right? Here's the run book. Please follow it, because we're going to pretend that Curtis got hit by a bus. It was never anything nice. It was never that I won the lottery and then just flew the coop. It was always Curtis got hit by a bus or got swallowed up in the great sinkhole of 2024.
How long do you think it's going to be until people don't even know what a bus is?
I think we're good. It's funny. Definitely an aside. When I was working the election the last 2 weeks, we're at a school, and one of the hardest times we're at a multifunction building next to a school, and one of the hardest times was during pickup and drop off, because there are all these parents that are picking up and dropping off their kids. And I was like, if only there was like a large vehicle where we could put all the kids in, and like we could like paint it yellow so that people could see it, and then like have a sign that comes out and make sure traffic stops in both directions. If only we could do all that, and then all these parents wouldn't have to like take their kids to school and waste all of that gas and all of those cars sitting there. And I'm sure the gas is running while they're sitting there for a half hour waiting for their kid to come out of school. Anyway, I digress. I don't know. But so that I think that we'll stop there, because basically the number one success criteria that I'm going to say is that what your success criteria are before. What are we going to restore? How are we going to restore it? Where are we going to restore it? And how long is it? What time frame are we trying to fit in? And also what other, like the thing we talked about with the other criteria being that we can do it without Curtis's help.
Yeah.
Right. Or whatever your Curtis is, right? Decide on what all of those are up front, and you have a much better chance of being successful when you actually do the recovery. What do you think?
No, that makes sense.
Okay. And with that, I will thank you once again for being a great co-host, Prasanna.
I try. This was fun. I like talking about disaster recovery testing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we will hope you guys enjoyed this as well. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap-Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.